We can now manipulate our materials to such an extent during grading, we hardly need to use filters. In fact, I'm often asked if anyone still does. The answer is yes. I do. All of these materials used the same filter technique to darken the skies. Without taking anything away from the colorists that did such brilliant work on these projects, they could not have captured such deep penetrated skies without me using what I call the double 85 technique. Let's take this frame from a close-up commercial as an example. The warm hue is from the 85 filter, but that could easily be pulled back during grading. I would have shot this frame using a double 85 even if I wanted the color to be balanced like this. I shot this project on film. The type of film I would normally use would be 250D. The 250 refers to the light sensitivity of the film. In a data camera, this is controlled by the ISO setting. The D stands for daylight balanced. In data, this is determined by the white balance setting we choose to shoot in. All light has a different Kelvin temperature. If we look at the Kelvin scale, we see direct sunlight has a temperature of 5600 Kelvin. This is slightly blue compared to base white. Tungsten has a temperature of 3200 Kelvin. This is quite warm or reddish compared to base white. You can see the difference here. This is 100% video white. This color is 5600 Kelvin. D-type film is balanced to capture this color as white. This is 3200 Kelvin, the color of tungsten light. If we want to capture this as white, we use a T-type film. If we use T or tungsten film in daylight, instead of balancing the 5600K to white, it will push it further to the blue. In fact, quite a lot to the blue. If you are going to use tungsten film outside, you have to use an 85 filter to balance this blue to white. For this shot, I deliberately used tungsten film in daylight and corrected it with an 85 filter. Then I used another 85 filter to give the warm hue you can still see. You could still use a third 85 and pull it back in grading. Notice the brightness of the subject compared to the brightness of the sky. The blue sky is not washed or burnt out at all. In fact, it's considerably darker and more penetrated than the subject, even though the subject was around f11 and the bright sky was about f22. If you have ever tried shooting straight up at the sky with a subject in foreground, you may find the subject would be in partial silhouette. I used the same technique in this ad shot in the desert. Again, the dilemma was how to match the exposure of the subject under the canopy to the bright desert sky. To maintain any blue in the sky and get a good exposure on my subjects, I would have to knock down the sky by around 2 stops to give the colorist something other than white to work with. To understand how the double 85 technique is working in both these shots, we need to look at the wavelength of light. All light travels in waves. The length of these waves is measured in nanometers. Visible red around 700 nanometers to visible blue around 450 nanometers. You're probably familiar with swatch books for lighting gels. Each color corrective gel is accompanied by a nanometer graph. It plots out the transmission of light as it passes through the gel. This is a nanometer graph for a deep orange filter. The numbers on the left indicate the percentage of light that passes through the filter. The numbers on the bottom are the wavelengths. To make this a little clearer, let's impose the color spectrum. This line indicates about 80% of red, yellow and some green light passing through the filter. This line indicates that almost no blue and very little green can pass through the filter. This cutting down of light is known as the filter factor. The 85 that I use has a filter factor of 1/3 stop. The dark orange that I occasionally use for this effect is 1/2 stop. But the filter factor is an average of the light lost. We can see orange light is hardly blocked, probably with a filter factor of only 1/16 of a stop. But the blue has a much larger factor of close to 1 stop. So by putting two 85s together, I am actually cutting down quite a lot of blue light. In this case, the sky, but hardly altering the exposure of the subjects at all. That selective filtering of colored light is how I get such a close ratio between the subject and the sky. This technique can also be applied to data cameras, setting white balance to tungsten and correcting with 85 color corrective filters. All of these frames were still heavily graded, but your colorist can only manipulate the images you give them. Overexposed skies are very difficult to save, let alone manipulate. There are other ways to balance the ratio or deepen the color of your skies using filters. This ad was shot on data. I used a graduated ND to keep the sky from clipping out. It was at least 2 stops over my subject. It would have looked like this without the filter. I used a graduated ND again here, also on a data project, to darken the upper portion of the sky. A linear polarizer darkened the lower portion. Polarizers are very useful filters that can do so much. And there will be a second part to this tutorial that will feature polarizers as well as other filter techniques. Grading has made filter usage somewhat of a forgotten art, and many creative filters are becoming difficult to find. I have a filter kit with over 50 filters. Given all the different combinations and configurations possible, I still find myself experimenting, formatting new techniques. I hope this has sparked a little interest in a fading art. Here are some more examples of filtered shots.